how you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Kuf Yud Zayin, Daf 117 of Masechta BavaMetzia. Friends, Daf Kuf Yud Zayin is gewaldig, but I also don't have that much time. It's going to be Shabbos soon, so right, Shabbos. I have an hour. But the shaila is if it's going to take an hour. That's the shaila. It might be an hour daf. All right. Well, anyways, it's gewaldig. All right, we're going to start Daf Kuf Zayin Amud Beis of Masechta BavaMetzia. Says the Mishnah about 5-6. I don't know. Before it gets wide on Kuf Zayin Amud Beis, says the Mishnah Habayis ve'aliyah. Like all the Mishnahs start with Habayis ve'aliyah, I think. No, not all of them. Alright, not all of them. I guess not the last one. Alright, or the last. Okay, not the last few. This one does. Habayis v'aliyah. So if you have a house, and so you have a 2-story situation. You have a ground level and you have an upper level. Now in this scenario, Shimon lives on the ground level and he is the landlord. He's the rentor, okay, and Ruvain lives on the second story. He's the renter, okay. He's renting from Shimon. So now Habayis v'aliyah. So you have a ground level and you have an upper level. Nifchasa ha aliyah. If the second floor that Ruvain, the apartment that Ruvain's renting be'etzem, falls apart, the Gemara is a machlokes. What's exactly considered nifchasa? At what point do we reach this nifchasa state? But ve'ein balabayis rotze l'sakin, and Shimon, the landlord, doesn't want to fix the apartment that he's renting to Ruvain. Harei bal ha'aliyah yored v'dar lamata. So Ruvain moves in downstairs to Shimon's apartment. Now the Gemara is going to ask, does he bunk with Shimon? Does Shimon have to leave? Okay, but anyways, Ruvain can move down to Shimon's apartment downstairs until Shimon fixes the upper, whatever needs to be fixed up there. That's the opinion of the Tanna Kama, that Shimon is responsible to do all the repairs. Rabbi Yosef says, that Shimon is responsible for the roof, for the basic infrastructure. That's what Shimon is responsible for. Ruvain is responsible for the plaster. All right. There's a lot to unpack here, which we are going to do now. It's going to be awesome. Says the Gemara, Nifchaso bekama. So when we say that the upper apartment gets all messed up, and Ruvain comes and goes and moves in with Shimon, at what point is it considered messed up enough that Ruvain goes and moves in with Shimon downstairs? Rav says that the floor of the apartment, the majority of the floor of the upper apartment, which is also the roof of the lower apartment, the ceiling of the lower apartment, the majority of it has to be messed up. Alright? Shmuel says 4 tfachim is enough. If there's a hole in the floor, 4 tfachim, it's enough for Ruvain to say, hey Shimon, I'm renting your apartment over here. There's a hole in the floor, 4 tfachim. I'm not living here. I'm moving in with you. Rav Amar Beruba, the reason why Rav says that we're talking about the majority of the floor, that that only once a majority of the floor is messed up, at that point he goes downstairs. Aval Be'arba, low, but only 4 tfachim, a little hole. He doesn't move downstairs. Adam dar chetzio lemata v'chetzio lemala, because according to Rav, a person will live partially downstairs and partially upstairs. Meaning, what happens? According to Rav, Ruvain goes to Shimon and says, hey Shimon, look, I got a problem. I'm renting your apartment upstairs and there's a hole in the floor. 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim. You know what Shimon says? Alright, I get it. You obviously can't use that space because there's a hole there. You can't put anything there, you can't use it. Okay, what can you fit in 4 tefachim? I don't know, maybe maybe a hamper. Maybe a hamper, okay? Or let's even say, I don't know, maybe a washing machine. It's probably more useful, okay? Okay, a washing machine. So how about this? Reuven, I understand you can't put your washing machine there because there's a hole in the floor. You can keep your washing machine in my apartment. And when you have to do laundry, just come down to my apartment. And that's completely fine, right? Rav says, Adam dar chetzu lamata v'chetzu lamala. A person can live partially downstairs, partially upstairs. So he'll live upstairs with the hole in the floor. And when he needs to do laundry, he'll go down to his laundry machine, which he's now keeping in Shimon's house. And that's acceptable as far as Rav is concerned. But once the issue becomes such that the majority of the floor is messed up, that's another story. And at that point, Reuven can move downstairs full time. Shmuel says, no. I don't agree with that sentiment. That 4 tefachim is enough for Reuven to say, I'm not living here, I'm moving downstairs, because ein adam dar chetzio lemata v'chetzio lemala. A person doesn't live partially downstairs and partially upstairs. And therefore, if there's a hole the size of 4 tefachim, which means that he obviously can't use that space, so then he moves there, he doesn't need to continue living there anymore, right? Shimon can't just say, okay, fine, move your washing machine downstairs. You know, you don't live partially downstairs, partially upstairs in 2 different apartments. Therefore, once there's a hole the size of 4 tefachim, Reuven says, I'm moving downstairs, full time. Heichidami, now what exactly was the arrangement between Reuven and Shimon? What was the rental agreement? Ida Omar Aliyah Zo. Well, if the rental was for this apartment, well, this apartment is broken. So Azda, Reuven just has bad luck. The rental was for that specific apartment. That specific apartment is no longer usable. Reuven has bad luck. Ela de Omar le Aliyah stam. Shimon says, I will rent you an apartment. Well, if that's the case, then why does Reuven have to move in with Shimon? Why can't Shimon say, Loger le'achrise? Why doesn't Shimon say, look, okay, fine, I committed to giving you an apartment. This one is obviously not working very good, but I have other apartments. Why don't you rent then one of my other apartments? Like, why does Reuven have to move in to Shimon's apartment? Can't he move into one of Shimon's other apartments if he has? So on my Ravit, Rava says, well, it's talking about the arrangement was very specific. The Amarle that Shimon says to Reuven, Aliyah zo shani maskir lecho, this apartment that I am renting to you, ki salka slik, when it's there, go there, when it's up, when it's standing, when it's working, be there. Kisalka slik baida v'chinochis chavos baida. Right, when it's up, you be up with it. When it's down, then you go down with it, right? Meaning, as long as the apartment is there and it's functional, you'll be in the apartment. If anything, if things go downhill, if it breaks or whatever, so then you'll come downstairs to my apartment. If that's the case, then what's the chiddush? That's literally their agreement. That so long as the upper apartment is in good shape, Reuven will live there, and if not, then he'll live downstairs. So, what's the chiddush? That's literally what they agreed to. So Elo Omar Rav Ashi, rather says Rav Ashi to Omar Lei, that the agreement was Aliyah zo she'al gabe bayezeh ani maskiloch. That the agreement was, I am renting you this apartment that's on top of my apartment, of the ground floor apartment. So now already on the one hand, yes, he says it's this apartment, but he also now connects it and makes a connection between the upper apartment and the lower apartment. The shibed bayis la'aliyah, that he's now kind of making the lower floor connected to the upper floor to the extent that if anything happens to the upper floor, Reuven's going to be entitled to move into the lower floor. V'chiyata Amar Ravin bar Rav Ada Amar Bitzchok Maise be'echad she'amar lachavero, that there was a maise where Shimon says to Reuven, Dolis she'al gabi parsik zeh ani mochel lecha. I'm going to rent to you. It says to sell, but I'm going to rent to you this vine that's on top of this peach tree. So he's making a connection now between the vine and the peach tree. V'nekar parsik, and the peach tree got uprooted. Uva ma'isa l'fnei Reb Chia, and the ma'isa came before Reb Chia v'omar, and he says, Chayvat lamed lo parsik, kozman she'adol is kaima. That as long as, right, meaning the arrangement was that Reuven was going to get this vine that's on top of this peach tree. So long as, right, so this vine is connected to the peach tree. They kind of made a connection between the two. And therefore, so long as the vine exists and Reuven is renting the vine, he's renting a vine that's connected to, that's on top of a peach tree. If the peach tree goes away, Shimon has to replace the peach tree because that was part of the arrangement. The vine is together with the peach tree. Alright. So here, he made a connection between the upper floor and the lower floor, and therefore, if anything happens to the upper floor, he can move into the lower floor. Boy Reb Abba bar Mamel. Now Reb Abba bar Mamel asks Akasha. Kishudar, so this is going to ultimately end, is this like going in the direction, it's going to ultimately end with, oh my gosh, somebody's blowing shofar. I got nervous. Why is he blowing shofar? What's today? There's no reason to blow shofar today. Yep, I'm pretty sure there's no reason to blow shofar today. Anyways, he's still doing it. But I thought it was the Shabbos bell, and I was like, oh no, that can't be good because I have so much time. But no, it can't be. It can't be. It's not for another 40 minutes or so. All right. Maybe somebody should tell him that Rosh Hashanah is in another few months, or at the very least, Elul. We got to go weiter. That was through the noise-canceling headphones, by the way. So this is going to end in Teku. By Reb Abba bar Mamel, I think maybe my ears might be, by the way, getting my ears might be getting used to the noise-canceling headphones. Maybe I got to get like super noise-canceling headphones. By Reb Abba bar Mamel, says Reb Abba bar Mamel. So now the shaila is, when Reuven moves downstairs to Shimon's apartment, does he bunk together with Shimon? Does he move in with Shimon? Or does Reuven say to Shimon, look, I rented an apartment from you. I was living there by myself. There's a hole in the floor. I'm moving downstairs. Get out. Right? My rental is for me, not for anybody else. If I can't live in the rental and I have to live downstairs, I'm living downstairs in the same way I lived upstairs. Get out. Right, so again, when Reuven goes downstairs to Shimon's apartment, does he get to live there by himself, like he was when he was upstairs? Or maybe they bunk together and they have a Haimish time. The Omarle. Because Shimon says, look, I didn't rent you an apartment so that I'll be homeless. If you can say that they bunk together, yeshivish. So if we say that they're going to now live together, Reuven's moving into Shimon's apartment with Shimon. So now how does Reuven get into the apartment? Does he go into Shimon's apartment on the ground floor through the main entrance? Right? Is going through the main entrance? Or does he have to climb, he has to go up to his apartment on the next floor and then go from his apartment down to Shimon's apartment? He doesn't go to the front door. He's got to go up and down. Do we say, well, it's just like initially. Well, just like obviously initially when Reuven was living upstairs, he would go upstairs. So Ashtanami, so now Oichit der Gagin, he goes upstairs first, and then from there he goes downstairs. Or Dilma, or perhaps Matzi Omerle, Reuven could say to Shimon, Aliyah Kabili Aloy, Aliyah V'yirida Lo Kabili Aloy. Look, yeah, when I was living upstairs, the understanding was, I was going to have to walk upstairs to my apartment. I never accepted upon myself a situation where I'd have to, in order to get into the place where I'm living, I have to walk upstairs and then also downstairs. Yeah, I understood that I have to walk upstairs to my apartment, but now there's a situation of walking upstairs to then go downstairs. That was never part of the cheshbon. Okay, fine. Let's say we'll say that, well, Reuven could say, I accepted to go upstairs, but not upstairs and downstairs. Okay. Shtei aliyah zo al gab zo ma. What happens if it was a 3-story building? So Shimon lives on the bottom floor, and then there's 2 units above, right? A 2nd floor and a 3rd floor. So if Reuven is renting the 3rd floor and the floor on the 3rd floor gets messed up, so nachas v'dar b'tachtona. Okay, so Shimon says, okay, go and live in the 2nd floor. Okay, fine. Say he goes and lives in the 2nd floor. If chis tachtona, but what if it's the 2nd floor that falls apart? Where does Reuven go? Does Shimon say, okay, Reuven, so go to the 3rd floor? Or does Reuven move in with Shimon on the bottom floor? Where am I? Do we say that, okay, fine, Reuven, go up to the 3rd floor? Do we say, Shem Aliyah Kabilis Oloch? Do we say, well, Reuven, look, when you accepted to rent the 2nd floor, obviously you were going to be walking upstairs to your apartment. So instead of walking upstairs to the 2nd floor, walk upstairs to the 3rd floor. Right, this is talking about when he's renting the 2nd floor and the 2nd floor breaks. So do we say go up to the 3rd floor because you accepted upon yourself anyways to walk upstairs? Perhaps chad aliyah kabil ole shtei aliyos lo kabil ole teku. Or do we say, look, Reuven accepted upon himself to walk up to the 2nd floor, not to the first, not to the 3rd floor. So therefore, let him move in with Shimon on the bottom floor. So we say teku. If you find Eliyahu Hanavi in a Beis Hakvaros of Nachrim, ask him this shaila. Rabbi Yossi Omer atachto nosin es atikra v'chulei. Rabbi Yossi says that wait, what? Rabbi Yossi Omer exactly. Rabbi Yossi says that the landlord and the Shimon needs to provide the sort of infrastructure for the roof, but Reuven would have to provide the plaster. So according to the Tanakama, Shimon would have to provide everything, including the plaster. According to Rabbi Yossi, Shimon only provides the sort of infrastructure, but Reuven would have to provide the plaster. My tikra. So what's considered sort of the ceiling, this like infrastructure that Shimon needs to provide? Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Amar Kinim V'Snoyin, reeds and thorns. I guess that's what they would make the ceiling out of. Ustini Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish says Ustini in the name of Reb Shimon ben Lakish Livachim planks. They don't talk or argue. Makiasu. It just depends whatever the minig amokum was, right? Whatever. In one place they would use reeds and thorns, in another place they would use planks. Okay, Cheved, now we get to a Geshmak Esugya. Geshmak. Hanu beitre de avu daire chariloi v'chatatoi ifchis mazeva kimoshimaya iloi az leumazki l'satoi Reb Bar Abba Omer elyon misakin v'biloi mishum Reb Yossi Omer atachto misakin v'simin Yosef fuad mitzrayma. Givaldig. The scenario is, this is not a rental. The scenario, a guy named Reuven and a guy named Shimon. No rental, no nothing. Shimon lives in the bottom floor. Reuven lives in the top floor. There's a hole in the floor, and Reuven's water is dripping into Shimon's apartment. Classic sort of apartment building scenario. Okay, the guy upstairs, there's an issue with the plumbing, and it's leaking into the guy downstairs apartment. Who hasn't had that situation at some point in their life? Okay, now, so let's read it inside. Hanu Beitre, you have these two people, Reuven and Shimon. Shimon's on the bottom, Reuven's on top. Davudare, Chariloi v'chatatoi, Reuven's on top, Shimon's on the bottom floor. Ifchis ma'azeva, and the plaster in Reuven's apartment on the top floor got messed up. And kimoshi maya iloi azle umazki lisatoi, and when Reuven would use the water on the top floor, it would drip into Shimon's apartment on the bottom floor. And of course the shaila is, who is responsible to fix it? Reb Bar Abba Amar Elyon Misakein. Reb Chia bar Abba says it is Ruvain's responsibility to fix it. Okay, sounds kind of like Reb Yossi in our Mishnah, who says that it's Ruvain's responsibility to provide the plaster. Rabbi Eloi, Mishum Reb Chia bar Reb Yossi, Amar Atachtin Misakin, whereas Rabbi Eloi, in the name of Reb Yossi, Reb Chia bar Reb Yossi, says that it is Shimon's responsible to fix the situation. Okay, the water is going to Shimon's apartment. Shimon's got to take care of it. Sounds like the Tanna Kama who say that Shimon, the Balabayas in the Mishnah, needs to fix the whole thing, including the plaster. B'Simon v'Yosefur Mitzrayim. Okay, a cute way to remember whose opinion is what. So Reb Chia bar Reb Yossi. It's like if Yosef Hurad Mitzrayim, right? It says Joseph was brought down to Egypt. So also Reb Chia bar Yossi is the one who says that it's the one downstairs at Shimon's responsibility to fix. Neymar Reb Chia bar Abba Reb Eloi beplukta Reb Yosef Rabbanon kamiflagei. So let's say that the machlokas between Reb Chia bar Abba and Reb Eloi, right? Reb Eloi in the name of Reb Chia bar Reb Yossi. So let's say the machlokas between Reb Chia bar Abba and Reb Eloi aligns with the machlokes in our Mishnah of Reb Yossi and the Tanna Kama. That Reb Chia bar Abba, who says that it is Ruvain's responsibility to plaster, would be like Reb Yossi, who says that it's Ruvain's responsibility to plaster, and Reb Eloi, who says that it is Shimon's responsibility to plaster and to do everything, would be like the Tanna Kama, who says that it's Shimon's responsibility to provide everything. So again, so Leimer Reb Chia bar Abba Reb Eloi beplukta Reb Yossi v'Rabbanon kamiflagei demande Omar Elyin misakin. So now we go a little bit deeper. We want to explain that both machlokes by the water getting in from basically the machlokes between Reb Chia bar Abba and Reb Eloi, as well as Reb Yossi and the Tanna Kama in our Mishnah. We're talking about where there's damage happening, that there's damage happening from the top floor to the bottom floor. Okay? And so therefore, we want to say that this is a machlokes about whose responsibility is to fix damages. So the Manda Omar Elyin Misakin, so according to Reb Chia bar Abba, and also according to Reb Yossi in our Mishnah, by extension, who says that it's the responsibility of Reuven in the top floor to fix, that when there's damage, that in our case, right, you have the top floor causing damage to the bottom floor, it's on the damager to fix the damage. Therefore Reb Chia bar Abba, as well as Reb Yossi, say that Reuven needs to provide the plaster to fix. Umando Omar Tachtin Misakin. And according to the opinion that it's Shimon's responsibility to fix, kasover ala nizok la'archik es atzmo min hamazik, that it is the person who's getting damaged, who's experiencing the damage, to stop it, to fix it, and to prevent the damage and to make it go away. And therefore, Shimon is responsible for the plaster, and that would be Rabbi Eloi, as well as Rabbi Eloi in the name of Reb Chia bar Reb Yosef. As well as the Tanna Kama in our Mishnah, V'tizbira. Turisha Gemara says, no, does that really make sense? Rabbi Yossi Rabbanon Linyon Nizakin Plige. Is that really true? Is that really? I mean, clearly, Reb Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Eloi are arguing about who's responsible for damage, right? We're saying that, Shimon lives downstairs, Reuven lives upstairs. There's water coming from Reuven's house into Shimon's house. Okay, clearly the machlokas there is about damages. But is the machlokas in our Mishnah when Shimon is renting an apartment to Reuven and there's a hole in the floor, whose responsibility is it to fix? Is that really a machlokas about damages and whose responsibility is to when there's damage going on? Whose responsibility is it? The damaging party or is it the damaged party? And Rabbi Yossi is saying it's the damaging party. The Tanna Kama says it's the damaged party. The problem is if that were the case, then it would be punkt fakert. Because actually, when it comes to the question of, is it the responsibility of the damaging party or is it the damaged party's responsibility? Actually, Reb Yossi is the one who's saying it's the damaged party's responsibility, and it's the Tanna Kama who says it's the damaging party's responsibility. That when it comes to whose responsibility is it to fix damages, so it would actually be the opposite. It's not as we learned in the Mishnah. You can't plant a tree too close to a pit because the roots of the tree are going to mess up and cause damage to the pit. Okay, so the question is, what happens if Ruvain on his property has a pit, Shimon on his property has a tree? And that's going to be a problem. So it's not we have to have a distance of 25 amis between a pit and a tree. For a carob tree, for a sycamore tree, you have to have 50 amis of distance. Whether the pit is higher up and the tree is planted lower down, like it's on like a hill and that's in the valley, or whether they're just next to each other, whatever it might be, you need this distance. Now, imabor kodam, if the pit was already there, now this is the opinion of the Tanna Kama, if the pit was already there when the tree was planted, well, then you have to knock down the tree, you have to cut down the tree, i.e. the damaging party, right? It's the tree, that's the roots of the tree is what's going to cause the damage. So we're saying the damaging party would have to take responsibility and cut down the tree. So Shimon, right? So let's say Reuven has the pit and Shimon, let's say to keep things the same, we've been talking about Reuven kind of being on top and causing the damage. So we'll say that it's Shimon's pit, and Reuven's got the tree, which is causing the damage. So we say Reuven needs to cut down his tree. Right? If the pit was there first, Reuven needs to cut down his tree. Im ha'ilon kodam. Now, if Reuven's tree was there before Shimon dug his pit, well then lo yikots. Then you don't need to cut down the tree. The tree was there first. Sofik zeh kodam. If we don't know, lo yikots, if we don't know which one was there first, well then leave the tree, don't cut it down. So we see though, but if we know that the pit was there first, then Reuven, who owns the tree, needs to take responsibility. He as the damaging party needs to take responsibility according to the Tanna Kama. Reb Yossi Omer says, Reb Yossi, afal pi shabor kodemis, even if the pit was first, kodemis la'ilon, lo yikots, Reuven does not need to cut down the tree. Because each one's doing things on their own private property. Right? Shimon can do whatever he wants on his property. Reuven can do whatever he wants on his property. If Shimon wants, he can build his pit in his property. If Reuven wants, he can plant whatever trees he wants on his property. And if it's causing trouble to Shimon's pit, so let Shimon do something about it. So Amar Reb Yossi So we say Reb Yossi's opinion is that it's the Nizak who needs to take responsibility, i.e. Shimon. And the Tanna Kama, the Rabbanan say that it's Reuven's responsibility. Wow. Chevra, so where are we right now? Where are we, Chevra? This is very, very geschmack, but there's also a few moving pieces. So let's take stock on where we are. We have our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is talking about a landlord and a tenant. The tenant is Reuven, who's on top. The landlord is Shimon, who's on the bottom. And there's an issue with Reuven's apartment on top. And according to Reb Yossi, Reuven is responsible for the plaster. According to the Chachamim, Shimon is responsible for everything, including the plaster. Okay. So again, according to Reb Yossi, Reuven is responsible for the plaster, and according to the Chachamim, Shimon is responsible for everything. Now, we have another case. A case where Reuven and Shimon are not landlords and tenants. They just own Reuven's apartment. It's on top of Shimon's. And there's an issue with the plaster on the floor. And now what's happening is water is coming from Reuven's apartment on top and causing damage to Shimon's apartment below. Reb Chia bar Abba says Reuven is responsible to fix the damage and plaster it. Rabbi Eloi, in the name of Reb Chia bar Yosef, Rabbi Eloi says that it is Shimon's responsibility to make the damage, make the damaging stop. Okay. Now we have another, and they're Amoraim. We now have a third case, the case of the pit and the case of the pit in the tree. Now, the case of the pit in the tree is really the one that's similar to the water damage coming from Reuven's apartment to Shimon's apartment, the Machlokas, Reb Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Eloi, right? In that case, with Reb Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Eloi, Reuven's water coming from his apartment is causing damage to Shimon's apartment below. And in the case of the pit and the tree, Reuven's tree is causing damage to Shimon's pit. So really those are the two cases, right? The machlokas of Reb Chia bar Abba and Rabbi Eloi, and the machlokas between Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim with regard to the pit and the tree, those are the two that are analogous. And really we should be saying that Reb Chia bar Abba, who says that it's Reuven's responsibility to fix the leak in his floor, would also hold like the Tanakama, who says that it's Reuven's responsibility to cut down his tree. And Rabbi Eloi, who says that it is Shimon's responsibility to stop the leak and fix it, he would also hold like Rabbi Yossi, who says that it's Shimon's responsibility to, take care of it, to fix his pit or whatever it is. So, Givaldik. So then the question is, okay, then what's the deal with the machlokas in our Mishnah, with the hole in the floor? Right? It's not necessarily water damage, but there's a hole. Reuven's renting the apartment from Shimon, and there's a hole in the floor. So what's pshat over there? So where am I? So I'm okay, fine. So rather, if we want to align the machlokas of Reb Chia bar Abba and Reb Eloi with the machlokas tanoim, beplugta to Reb Yossi v'Rabbanon dehasim k'miflige. Right, it's about right. They would align with the machlokas between Reb Yossi and the Chachamim with regard to the tree and the pit. Reb Yossi Rabbanon dehacha b'may pligeim. What's the machlokas then in our Mishnah when Shimon's the landlord and Reuven's the tenant? It's simply a matter of it's not that there's water pouring in from Reuven's apartment to Shimon's apartment. That's not the issue. The issue is that Reuven is living in an apartment that has a hole in the floor, or that the floor is, messed up in some way. And Reuven's saying, look, I don't want to live like this. And Shimon has a responsibility to fix that. And the question is, to what extent is that responsibility? Rabbanan Sav Mazeva Achzuke Tikra Hu. That the Tanakama says it's Shimon's responsibility because plaster is included in the infrastructure of the ceiling. It's necessary for it to build a ceiling. You need plaster. Therefore, Shimon is responsible for that to fix his ceiling. Rabbi Yossi saw Mazeva Ashvuye Gumisu Vashvuye Gumis Al Elyon La Ashvuye. Whereas Rabbi Yossi says no, the main stuff is, I guess, as we said earlier, whether it's the reeds and the thorns or the planks, that's the main thing. The plaster is more just smoothing things out, but it's not necessary as such, and therefore it's Reuven's responsibility to provide that. Okay, but it's not about damages and whose responsibility to fix, it's not like there's water damage coming from Reuven's apartment to Shimon's apartment, who needs to stop it? It's not talking about that. It's talking about whose responsibility is it to make sure that the ceiling is stable. Ini. Now, is this true that we could say that Rabbi Eloi would hold like Rabbi Yossi, right? Did I get that right? No, I think it was Rabbi Chia's opinion. No, wouldn't it be? One second. Yeah, exactly, right. Yep. Because Rabbi Elazar's opinion is the same as Rabbi Chia bar Yosef, right? Not Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Okay, we had said that according to Rabbi Eli, when Ruvain, there's water coming from Ruvain's apartment into Shimon's apartment and causing damage, Rabbi Eli had said that it's Shimon's responsibility to stop the water from damaging his apartment. And we want to say that is like Rabbi Yossi, who says that by the pit and by the tree. Rabbi Yossi says that it's Shimon's responsibility to take care of his own pit. However, would Rabbi Yossi say though that in the case of water damage coming directly from Ruvain's apartment into Shimon's apartment, that Ruvain would say, that Rabbi Yossi would say that it's Shimon's responsibility to fix? Is that true? V'amar Rav Ashi, says Rav Ashi, Gavina Be'er of Kahana, when we buy Rav Kahana, Hava Amina, we said, Mod Rabbi Yossi Begirei delay. That Rabbi Yossi though would admit that if it was his arrow, if it was coming directly from him, then Ruvain would be chayiv. Meaning, where does Rabbi Yossi say that it's Shimon's responsibility? In a situation of a pit and a tree. The tree isn't directly, right? It's not like, Reuven isn't directly damaging Shimon's pit. He planted a tree. Eventually, over time, roots are going to grow and they're going to spread, and eventually it's going to cause damage, but nothing direct. Whereas in the situation of Reuven literally has a leak in his bathroom and his drain is going directly to Shimon's apartment, that's a direct damage. Rabbi Yossi would of course say that Reuven is responsible for that. And for the Gemara, to paske mai vadu nafli. No, but the thing is that it's not talking about where the water is coming like directly from Reuven's drain into Shimon's apartment. It's actually talking about, I don't know, there's water, the leak was actually in some other part of the apartment, and water would travel from one place and end up in some other place, and from there it would fall into the apartment. So it wasn't actually directly, it was more like a little bit more roundabout. So therefore, that is why we could say that Rabbi Yossi would say there that Shimon would be responsible, because it wasn't a direct damaging situation. So I might actually be doing pretty decent on time. I think I have 15 minutes until I gotta call it, and might be enough time. I think we're doing okay. Habayis v'aliyah says in the second mission of today's daf, that Habayis v'aliyah, if you have a first floor and a second floor, shel shnayim, and it belonged to Reuven and Shimon. They're not tenants or anything like that. Well, they're both, meaning they both own their apartments, a ground floor apartment and a second floor apartment. Shenaflu, and the ganze thing falls down. Pasha collapses. So now, what do? So Reuven's on top, Shimon's on the bottom. Reuven says, okay, Shimon, I got to build my house again. The thing is, I own the second floor, you own the first floor. I can only build the second floor on top of a first floor, so I need you to get moving. So Abayis v'aliyah shel shnayim shenaflu, there was a 2-story building, and it fell down. So Amar Bala Aliyah, so Reuven says, the Balabayis to Shimon, who owns the first floor, Livnos, that, he's got to get his act together and build the first floor so that Reuven, could then be able to rebuild his house on top of it. V'hu eino rotze livnos. Shimon is not interested. I don't know, maybe he owns other property, he can move into a different apartment. Shimon's not in a rush. Reuven, on the other hand, wants to rebuild his life, wants to rebuild his apartment. His apartment is the second floor. He needs a first floor to build on top of. Hare balo aliyah bone es habayis. So what Reuven could say is, fine, look, Shimon, I need you to build the first floor so that I can build my house on top of yours. If you're not willing to build the first floor, then I'm going to build the first floor and I'm going to live in it. And Reuven then lives in that first floor apartment until Shimon finally says, okay, Reuven, I'm going to pay you for your expense. Shimon then pays Reuven for his expense, and Reuven can then build on top of that. But until then, Reuven will just live in Shimon's property. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda, so the assumption now is that Rabbi Yehuda holds is chayav. That actually if Reuven can't build a second floor without a first floor. It's gravity. I mean, what do you want me to tell you? So Reuven builds the first floor and he lives in there, but he does need to pay Shimon rent because it's zenene zenene v'zelo chaser is chayiv. But what he can do is ela balo aliyah bones abayis veso aliyah makres alyona v'yoshe b'bayis achitano sitziosav. Rather, Rebuta says he just needs to do a little bit further. What Reuven does is he builds the first floor, and then he builds a basic frame for a second floor on top of it with a roof. So technically speaking, at this point, Reuven can already live in the second floor. Now it's completely, he's not rebuilding the whole thing for Shimon, for him and everything. He puts up a basic pashut thing on top. He doesn't have to live there. But the point is, once he could be living there, well, then he's not going to be homeless. And therefore, he can now live on the bottom floor. And it's a situation of Zed lo nene, right? Reuven's not getting any benefit from living in Shimon's apartment. He could, or it's not like he's going to be homeless, right? So it's lo nene, Zed lo chaser, right? Reuven is not benefiting. Shimon is not lacking anything because Shimon's not in a rush. He's living somewhere else, clearly. So Shimon's not lacking anything. Reuven isn't getting any benefit because he could technically live upstairs if he wants. So once it's already Zed lo nene, Zed lo chaser, well then Reuven will not need to pay Shimon rent, and he can live in Shimon's apartment that Reuven built for him until Shimon is willing to pay him for his expense. Alright, fine. Givaldig. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yechanan says, Bishlosha Mekomis, in 3 places, Shana Lanu Rabbi Yehuda taught us, Osur le'odem she'ehene mimamon chavero, that a person may not benefit from his fellow's money. Right? That a person cannot get benefit from his fellow's money. Chado aditnan, one from our Mishnah. Right? Rabbi Yehuda says that in a situation of zeh nene v'zeh lo chaser, in a situation where Reuven builds Shimon's apartment for him, because Shimon didn't want to do it himself, if Reuven lives in that apartment, he would have to pay rent to Shimon, even though it's zeh nene v'zeh lo chaser, because he's getting benefit from his friend's property. Idach mai, what's the second example? It's not, as we've learned in the Mishnah a few times. If somebody gives wool to a dyer to dye it red, but he dyed it black, or black, but he dyed it red. So Reb Meir says, look, the dyer is koned with shinoi maise. He can keep the incorrectly dyed wool, and nosin lo d'mei tzmaro, and he just pays the client the value of the wool. Okay, he made a mistake, so he keeps the wool and he pays the client the value of it. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, the dyer does not keep the wool, because then he's benefiting, right? If he would want to buy wool, he'd have to go to the wool store, or he'd have to pay a delivery person to deliver it. Like this, the client is bringing him wool, he's dyeing it, he's keeping it. He can't benefit like that. So rather, no, if the dyer messes up, he's got to give it, he can't keep it. He's not getting anything out of this. He's giving it back to the client. And then, if the improved value to the wool was more than the expense that the dyer expended to dye it, so you pay him the expense, which is the lower amount. If the expense was more than the improvement to the wool, you give him the improvement, i.e. the lower amount. So we see that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the dyer does not benefit whatsoever from this wool. He gives it back and he gets paid the lower amount. Ve'idach, in the third case, what is it? Ditnan mishepara miktsas chovo vehishlish es shtaro. Okay, this is talking about a scenario where Shimon lent Reuven $1,000. Reuven has paid back $250 of it. And the question is now, what do you do? There's a few ways you can solve the situation, but the question is, what do you do? Shimon lent $1,000 to Reuven. Reuven paid back $250 of it. The thing is, Shimon right now has a document that says that he lent Reuven $1,000 and that Reuven owes him $1,000. So Reuven obviously is concerned, wait, I already paid him back $250. He's got a document saying that I owe him $1,000. Why do I have a feeling that I'm going to end up paying $1,250 because he's going to claim the full $1,000 nachamo? So meaning even though I've paid him 250. So the question is, how do you deal with this? Look, there are solutions. You can write a receipt. One potential solution is that they can agree to give the document to a trusted third party, give the document to Levi. So Shimon no longer has the document. So Shimon's no longer going to come to Beis Din and claim that he's owed $1,000 because he doesn't have a document anymore. Levi is a trusted third party who knows that Reuven has already paid back Shimon 250. And Levi is going to hold on to the document until the loan is fully repaid. Okay. So Mishapar Miktas Chova, Reuven has already paid back $250 of the $1,000 loan. V'ishlish Ashtaru, and they gave the document to a trusted third party. V'amar lo, and Reuven says to the third party, to Levi, look, I plan to pay back Shimon. Im ein ani nosen l'cha mikan v'ad zman ploni. If I don't pay you back, I guess the arrangement was that he was going to pay the third party. Alternatively, there's a different case that says if I don't pay back Shimon by a certain time. But the point is, if I don't settle this loan by a certain time, well then tein lo shtaro, you can give back the document to Shimon. And yeah, I know that means that potentially he might try to collect $1,000 from me, even though I've already paid back 250. Higia Azman, and sure enough, that time came and went. V'lo nasan, and Reuven had not yet paid back, settled the loan. So Biosi Omer Yitin. So Biosi says, well, we gotta take him at his word. What he said was that if he doesn't pay back by that time, then you can give the document back to Shimon. So we give it back to Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Lo Yitin. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, don't give it back to Shimon, because we don't want any potential for Shimon to get a benefit from Reuven's money more than he's allowed to. But Amai, Fekti Gemara, I don't know. None of these three examples are conclusive that they necessarily teach that Reuven is that Rabbi Yehuda is so sensitive about anybody getting unauthorized benefit from somebody else's property, money. Maybe in this situation of our Mishnah with Reuven and Shimon, where the two-story house collapses, and we say that if Reuven builds the first floor, so Yehuda says that if Reuven builds the first floor, he'd have to pay Shimon rent. So we said that that's because Zenenev Zelochaser is Chayav, because even though Shimon isn't lacking anything by Reuven living in his house, but because Reuven is getting benefit, he would still have to pay Shimon because he's so sensitive to getting benefit from other people's property. But maybe that's actually not the reason. Maybe it's not because of Zenene v'zeh chaser. Maybe it's Zenene v'zeh chaser, because there's wear and tear that's going to happen to Shimon's house. By Reuven living in the house, right, the shacharisa, right, the walls are going to become blackened, right? There's going to be wear and tear. So it's Zenene v'zeh chaser, and that's why Reuven has to pay rent, potentially. Inami, alternatively, litzbalo adam litzbalo shachar. What's the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says that if the dyer was supposed to dye the wool red, but he did black, or vice versa, that the dyer has to give back the wool, he can't keep it? It's not because we don't want the dyer getting any benefit, any extra benefit. But Mishum Dika Mishane, but it's because he changed from what he was supposed to do. And we learned in Mishnah Mishane Yoda Tachtona. And simply the halacha is that whoever changes from what they were supposed to do is in the weaker situation, and therefore they're not in a position to get any benefit. And they do have to give it back, and they will get paid the lesser amount. That's just the halacha. Mishapara Miktas Chavo, and also, when we say that Reuven already paid back $250 of the $1,000 loan, and they gave it to the third party, and then the time is up, and he still didn't settle it, so Rabbi Yehuda says, don't give the document back to Shimon. It's not because Rabbi Yehuda is so sensitive about getting benefit from people's property, but Rabbi Asmachta, Rabbi Yehuda holds Asmachta Lokanya. That when Reuven said that if I don't pay you back by that time, you can give the document back to Shimon, that's crazy. Why would Reuven say that? Because what he's saying is, I'm going to pay you back by that time. If I don't, you can give it back to Shimon, and that's crazy, right? Because then Shimon could then collect the whole $1,000. I'll pay you back on time. Turns out I didn't pay back on time. Now what? Well, it's an asmachta. He assumed he was going to pay back on time. What? No, you can't give the document back to Shimon. Now you could collect all of $1,000, even though $250 has already been paid. No. So Rabbi Yehuda says you don't give the document back to Shimon because it was an asmachta when Rabbi Yehuda said that. When Reuven said that, an asmachta lo kanya. Omer v'acha bar Ado mishmei de'ula tachtin haba l'shanis. So now they're coming to rebuild the house. Okay, 2-story building fell down. Now they're rebuilding it from scratch. So maybe they want to make some changes. So let's say Shimon on the bottom wants to make some changes. So begvil shomen lo, if he wants to use unhewn stone, which is 6 was it amis deep or tfachim thick? What was it? Where am I? No. Okay. Come on. Tefach. Wait, what? I think. Oh no. Wait. I need to check it out. Wait. One second. Yeah. Okay. If it was made of unhewn stone, so then it would be thicker. It would be a stronger base. So if Shimon wants to use a thicker wall, so then Reuven says, okay, great. I mean, it's a thicker foundation. That's better for me. Right, so where am I? So Amar Rav bar Adam Mishmei Ula talking about the Shanos Begvil. If he wants to use unhewn stone, which would end up being a thicker wall, 6 tefachim thick, Shomen, and that's fine. But because it's ain't Shomen though. But if he wants to use hewn stone, which would be 5 amas thick wall, well then that's not okay because Reuven says, wait, this is going to be a less sturdy building for me to build on top of, foundation for me to build on top of. With these like half-sized bricks that were each 1.5 tefachim wide, and then you'd put 1 tefach of mortar, I guess, between them, so that makes it a 4 tefachim wide. So then that is okay. But but these bricks that are 3 tefachim wide, without any mortar or anything, so then that's, I guess, weaker, and we don't listen. Ain't Shomen lo. L'sakich by Rozim, if Shimon wants to use cedar for his ceiling, Shomen lo, Givaldi, because it's strong. B'shikmim ain't Shomen lo, but not with sycamore, which is weaker. L'mayit bachlonis, if Shimon wants to have less windows this time around, which means it's going to be a sturdier wall, Shomen lo, then that's fine. Laharbos bachlonis, but if now Shimon wants to add windows, ain't Shomen lo, that's not okay, because it's going to be a weaker wall. La'agbia ain't Shomen lo, and if Shimon wants to make his house taller, ain't Shomen lo, because that would make things less sturdy for Reuven, who needs to build higher up now. L'mayit, where am I? L'mayit Shomen lo, but if Shimon wants to make his wall lower, which would be more sturdy for Reuven, then fine. Elyon Shabal Shanos, if Reuven's the one who wants to make changes, because it's Shomen lo, if he wants to use hewn stone, which is a 5 tefach thick, right? So Shomen lo, right? Shomen lo, Begvil ain't Shomen lo. But if he wants to use unhewn stone, which is 6 tefachim thick, we don't listen to him because that's going to be heavier on top of Reuven, Shimon's apartment. Bechvisen ain't Shomen lo. If he wants to use the half width bricks with a tefach of mortar in between, ain't Shomen lo, that's not okay. But Levanim Shomen lo, but with 3 tefachim wide bricks, which then we do listen, right? Because the 1.5 tefachim ones with a tefach of mortar in between ends up to 4 tefachim, whereas the 3 tefachim bricks are 3 tefachim, and therefore we don't. But the half ones end up being 4 tefachim, which is heavier. So therefore, that's not okay because it's going to be heavier on Shimon's, on top of Shimon's apartment. But Rozim ain't Shomen lo. If Reuven wants to use cedar, now he wants to use cedar, that's not okay because it's heavier. B'shikma Shomen lo, but if he wants to switch to sycamore, that's fine because it'll be lighter on top of Shimon's apartment. L'rabos bachlonos Shomen lo. If Reuven wants to add windows, that's fine because it'll be lighter, meaning not weigh as much as a full wall. L'mayit bachlonos, but if he wants less windows, ain't Shomen lo, we don't listen because less windows is a heavier wall on top of Shimon's apartment. L'agbi ain't Shomen lo, l'mayit Shomen lo. If he wants to make it higher, we don't listen because again, a higher apartment will be a heavier apartment. Like a taller apartment would be a heavier apartment, but if he wants to make it shorter, then that would be fine. Ein lo lazev lo lazemai. What if they don't have the money, what if they're poor, they don't have the money to fix it and they want to sell it? So how much of the property belongs to Shimon versus Reuven? Shimon on the bottom versus Reuven on top. Tani Reb Nosson says Reb Nosson tachton oto shnei chalakim ve'elyun shlish. Says Reb Nosson that Shimon would get 2/3 of the property and Reuven would get 1/3. And others say, and Acherim say that Shimon would get 3 parts and Reuven would get 1 part, right? 3/4 versus 1/4. Amarabba says Rabbi Nikot Reb Nosson biyodcha, go with Reb Nosson to Dayanu v'nochus lumka dedina, because he's a dayan and he goes to the depth of the subject. Kosover kama mafsid aliyah babayis tilsa ilkoch is late tilsa. When you have 2 floors on a building, i.e., in this case, you have Shimon on the bottom, Reuven on top. The upper floor will reduce. Will kind of have wear and tear on the first floor by a third, and that is why we kind of only give him 1/3 as opposed to Shimon who gets 2/3. Peace out.